This is Gemara Daf Lamed Aleph of Masechtas Shabbos, and we'll continue with Kli Rishon, Kli Sheni, cooking in secondary objects. Now, before we go on, we just understand what we're talking about. Bishul on Shabbos is from a fire. So when you put something on a fire, that is bishul. You can't cook with anything else. However, the Rabbanan were concerned with other types of cooking when it came from a fire. So, for instance, if you had a pot that was on the fire, so the pot was on the fire and that was cooked from a fire, and therefore it's obviously kares, chatos, etc., deraisa. When you take that pot off the fire, now it's no longer a fire. If you put something in that is raw into that pot, that is hot enough to cook it, but it's not cooking from a fire. Still, the Rabbanan were concerned, since this pot was cooked from a fire and it is very hot, putting raw things into it, that is going to be bishul on Shabbos. Even though it's not being cooked directly from the heat of a fire, but the heat of the fire still remains inside the pot. It hasn't extinguished. The heat of the fire is still inside the pot. So the pot was cooked with the fire. And now this raw item is being cooked with the water in the pot. So it's the heat that remains that was absorbed from the fire. Fire heat was transferred from flame into the heat inside the water of the pot. Now we understand. So now we go on. Amar Rab Mana. Mana says, Hahan pincha diorza, a bowl of rice. It remains hot even after taking off the fire. Messiah la'aba. So it supports the father of Yonah. Rabbi Yonah says, Kli Rishon, Kli Sheni, makes no difference. It remains hot. Hahan pichna de girsa. If you have a bowl of grits. If you're ever down south and you ever get breakfast from down south, they have grits. That stays hot. Messiah la'aba. And it supports my father. The atnufnei le min asar la'asar. When you transfer place to place, the yad kedain hu roiseach, and yet it remains very, very hot. And I might add egg rolls. You could get an egg roll that is hot. You could put it in your fridge. You take it out the next day, it's probably still hot. So there are certain foods that remain hot, that retain heat. Zokt halacha hey. Ha'ilfas, v'agdera, v'harvan, a frying pan or a pot that was removed while it was boiling. So you have a frying pan that was on heat on Shabbos, and it's getting hot. Nothing was in the frying pan. The frying pan itself was just on the heat. And you have something that was boiling on heat. Lo yiten oseichon tavlin. One may not add spices to them. You can't just put spices into those because they're hot from the fire. Avol noisen hu l'soich hakara or l'soich ha-tamchi. You could add it to the bowl or to a tureen. Rabbi Yehuda says, lakol hu noisen. You could add spices really into anything. Except for vinegar or brine, and obviously anything that's on a fire. So as long as it's off the fire, even if it remains hot from the fire, you could put spices in that. You could put spices in that. And he's talking about a Kli Sheni. He's not talking about the frying pan or the boiling pot that came off the fire. So any Kli Sheni you could put spices into, except for something that has vinegar or fish brine, because that's considered cooking. The Gemara says, Mahu litein tavlin milmata. What is the law if you place spices below, and you pour hot from above? Remember, above is less and the bottom is more. But in this situation, it makes a difference because the spices are easy to cook. So you can have a lot of spices or a few spices. Any hot thing that you pour from on top and hits it, it can make it cook. And that's coming directly from something that came off the fire. The Kli Rishon, it came directly off the fire. Rabbi Yonah says, Asar, it's Asar. The Yeruye ki Kli Rishon. That pouring is like Kli Rishon. A roye kli rishon is when you're pouring it from the hot pot. A roye is like a kli rishon, meaning it's already coming out, and therefore it's not considered like it's on the fire, but it's also not considered like kli sheni. It's kli rishon. Chayle de Rabbi Yonah min Hada. Rabbi Yonah's support is from Zochem echad shebivishel boy. Whether one cooked in a vessel, echad sheiril soichai roiseach, or whether one poured hot into it. So he's comparing it to zvachim, which is kashrus. So Rav Yisrael says it's different. You can't really compare them. Tamon kli cheres balea. This one is talking about balea, talking about how much of a kli cheres of an earthenware vessel absorbs taste, and that we know that it happens right away, and it doesn't have to have such a heavy heat. Putting something warm or hot in it will make it balea. So tavlin ain't no tavshilin, but spices do not become cooked. They're not cooked for Shabbos, but as far as balea, that happens at a lower temperature or at a lower standard. Haisiv Rabbi Yossi Breibun. So Rabbi Yossi, the son of Rabbun, asked, "V'hatane we learned in the Brisa, af b'chli no choishes kain, but also regarding a copper vessel that if hot broth was put into it, then it must be purged because also it has balea. Islach lemeimar kli lecheshes balea. Are you going to say that it's possible to say that a copper vessel absorbs, more than any other material? See, I don't even understand the question because yes, all metal kli and earthenware klis absorb and balea. Balea is at a lower standard than cooking. So the answer is yes. Just because it was balea does not mean necessarily that it's also the standard of cooking. But this is what Rabbi Yossi Barabud was asking. Mahu la'aros imakaleach. What happens if you pour it together while you're pouring the stream that's coming from the primary pot of the tea kettle? You put it in there, so you're putting in the oroi. Amar Rav Chananya Barei Rav Hill, or Chananya Barei Hill says, Machlokes Rabbi Yomi and Rabbi Yossi. So Machlokes Rabbi Yomi and Rabbi Yossi. Again, whether you're going to consider that to the standard of cooking or not. Klirisha and Klisheni, whether it remains hot, etc. Rabbi Yitzchak Bar Gufta Ba Kumi Rabana. Rabbi Yitzchak Bar Gufta required Rabana. Asa came b'Shabbos. If one did so on Shabbos, Chai b'Shum Vashel. Is he liable for cooking? Asa came b'Vasar v'Chalav. So one did so with meat and milk. Chai b'Shum Vashel. Is he also liable cooking Basar v'Chalav? Is that hot enough? Is that good enough? Amarle Kayadma Rab Zeira. It's like Rab Zeira. Ve'il Cholot Bar was absolute scalding. Kol Shehu Mahalech Tachtov, where the fire is going beneath it. The Khan here too. Ezo Tavshel Bar. It was absolute cooking. Kol Hu Mahalech Tachtov. If the fire is going beneath it. If the fire is going underneath it, then that is the actual cooking the Yoraisa. If the fire is not going underneath it, it's not the cooking the Yoraisa. Rabbi Yuda Aimer Lakolhu Noisen Chutz Midavar Sheish by Chaymetz V'tzir. He says one may add anything except for something that is containing vinegar or brine. Adaite Rabbi Yuda Melach Ketzir Yain Kechaymetz. That salt is like brine. Something that's very very salty is like brine, and wine is like vinegar, and those have the capacity to cook also. So that will be considered something that's not even so hot, but it contains those. It's considered cooking, and of course, cooking is obviously from the heat of the fire. Halacha vav. One may not put on Shabbos a kli underneath a nair to catch the oil. If he did it before, it was when it was still daytime for Shabbos. That's fine. One may not benefit from the oil because it's muksa. Because it wasn't prepared before Shabbos. Therefore, it is muksa. Muksa is not unprepared and can't be moved. Zag the Gemara. Now let's go into some hilchos muksa. Rab Chagai inquired, but what happens if it was extinguished while it was still day? But he first became aware of it at nightfall. So now is the oil muksa because it was extinguished before day. He prepared it to light, you lit, and you wanted it to be lit for Shabbos. And then it went out before Shabbos, but then he comes home from shul and realizes the light is out. Can he take the oil? And he put it into a salad, let's say, if that's the same oil that he used. So they argued. Again, it was at muksa because it wasn't prepared for Shabbos, or since by the time it actually got dark, there was no light underneath it. Therefore, it wasn't really prepared for lighting anymore. And if it wasn't prepared for lighting anymore, so the question is, does it have to be prepared for heter, or does it just not have to be prepared for isser or being used for isser? So one of the colleagues inquire, that the lamp came extinguished during the Shabbos day, but he first came aware of it on the following Shabbos. So now we're talking about it's going to still be muksa because it wasn't. Now it's next Shabbos, Eve, and it went in the whole entire week, and the whole entire week Bistama. He didn't obviously prepare it either for mutter or for iser. He just left it, and then the other Shabbos came, and he thought that it had been burnt the previous Shabbos, but lo and behold, it was not burnt the previous Shabbos, and he did nothing with it the entire week. Now what's the halacha? Rav Yochanan says, "Ein lecha davar shehu be'enai." We have nothing that is suitable for use in its current state. The einai b'hachaynai. It is nevertheless not in its state of. It's not in its state of pureness. Elo davar echad b'vad, except for one item. So anything except for food. So anything that is used that was not suitable in its current state. Even though it is not necessarily being used for Issa right now, so then that's going to be considered still muksa. So Hasev Rav Lazarus. Now we have a whole bunch of challenges in trying to figure out to what extent muksa is. Hare Shemen Bener, you have Shemen and Ner. Hare Be'enai Hu Ve'enai Ba'achanai. Why is it suitable it's suitable for eating in its current state? And the Ner went out. So why are you saying that it's not prepared? Lakach. So the Gemara answers, Nasnai Misha'a Rishina Shiyachla Baner, because he placed it in a lamp at the outset and it depleted there. Now it was already prepared for Isser to be used as a Ner. Hatzavar Shlakish, and he challenged, Hare Chitin Biz Irab. You have Chitin that was sown, that was put into the ground, kernels, and it was put on late on Friday. They're suitable to eat. You can dig them up and you can eat them, but they weren't prepared for eating necessarily. So what's going to do with them? So lakach nisnu misha rishayna sheichlu b'karka. Because the second you put them into the ground, they already are designated to be decomposed. So therefore, it was actually designated for an isser. Sivine. So then they challenged Hare Beitzim Lavroichim. Consider eggs that developed in a chicken. Hare they came out on Shabbos, and they weren't prepared, but they're not used for Isser. So no, if you didn't take them right away, then they were prepared to come to chicks, and therefore they were growing into actual chickens, and they are muksa. Hasev Rav Yermi, challenge, Hare, Iture, Sukkah. What about the Sukkah decorations that are pomegranates and grapes that are actual food? Hare Beina Behecham, right? They're suitable to eat and they weren't necessarily there for a certain reason. So Shani, that's different. Dama Rav Amrei Archan, Rav Yaisa, he says, Kol Shiva Hein B'Telin Al Gav Sukkah. They're all mevatel to the sukkah. They're all subjected to the sukkah, to serve the sukkah. So therefore they're prepared for the sukkah itself, and all 7 days they consider decorations, and they are muksa. Now we're going to challenge something that's not food. Hare muchan shenisparzu. If you consider a case of dry flocking, which is insulation, and then it fell off before Shabbos. It's suitable to use now for other things because it wasn't being used for Isser when Shabbos came in. So that's for Kalim. Kalim was designated on Friday, they designate throughout Shabbos, unless you redesignate them. And they were dealing with food, and food can maybe be changed without intention before Shabbos. Hasev Rav Nasa challenge Hare Muksa Sheyavash Lagaboy. Consider set aside figs and grapes that were dried by the owner. And he did not touch them before Shabbos. So they're just being dried. Let's say they dried it before Shabbos, and he didn't touch them yet. Before Shabbos, take them off the roof. While each fruit is suitable in its current state, and it wasn't prepared for anything else because it was done before Shabbos. They're like kalim because they're turning and drying, and while they're drying, no one should be touching them. So therefore, they were designated not to be touched the entire time until they were taken off. Since they weren't taken off, even though they are food, like kalim, and therefore they can't be touched. And therefore, they like kalim and like food stuff. So therefore, it comes like this: if you prepare something that is a keli before Shabbos, and it did not serve its purpose through Shabbos. In other words, before it got dark, let's say you had a light on and then the light bulb went out before it got dark, but it was on before Shabbos, then it unscrewed and it went out for whatever reason. Or you have oil that's being used to light, and it's lighting oil, and You did light it, but then the flame went out before Shabbos, and now you want to take it and you want to I don't know, whatever you want to do with it, whatever you possibly could use it for. So if it's that type of stuff, then once it's designated Erev Shabbos, so long as he doesn't redesignate it before Shabbos comes, muksa throughout Shabbos. The next week, I don't think we can extend it that far. Obviously, a week goes by. It happens really every Shabbos. You have to designate it. So if it's designated on Friday for muksa, and even though it became mutter before Shabbos, but he didn't redesignate it before Shabbos, muksa throughout Shabbos. Food that was designated for a muksa purpose, set aside for another purpose, but it became mutter before Shabbos, and you could use it on Shabbos. The halacha is zayin. One may move a new lamp, but not an old lamp. But again, these are not ones that are lamp. Rabbi Shimon says, "Kol ner is natlan." You can move all neros, chutz min haner lahad like b'Shabbos, except for a ner that is burning on Shabbos, because that obviously is muksa.